I'm James Jim Davison, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired. Also president of the Korean War Veterans Association. And for those of you that don't know, we have a memorial in Hillcrest Cemetery. 60 years ago, November 7, 1948, I enlisted in the United States Navy. From there, from Fresno, I was a native of Fresno and around that area. From there, I went to San Francisco, took my physical, rode a train up there, rode a train back to San Diego, did recruit training, graduated in the end of February, March, I went aboard the destroyer USS Henderson DD 785. It was going on a Westpac, which is in the Western Pacific tour, which at that time was 9 months. And we were stationed out of Yokosuka, Japan, and Sasebo, Japan. On July 4th, 1949, there was a contingent of us of 200 sailors, 400 blacks, and about 20,000 armies, did a review in front of General Douglas MacArthur in Tokyo. I remember that vividly. In August of 1949, we did a goodwill tour in Korea, rode the train from Incheon over to Seoul, and visited there. We were not received too well. What the reason was, I do not know. Never did find out. But anyway, we tried to visit, and converse with it, but we couldn't. And there was machine gun nests all over the place, very hostile. So we boarded the train and went back to the ship. There's a 27-foot tide in Incheon, so we went ashore when the high tide, and we had to wait till the tide came back in before we could go back to the ship. We went back to the States in December. In March of 1950, went to Naval Shipyard in San Francisco for a 9 months overhaul. We never completed that because on June 27, 1950, North Korea attacked South Korea and was about to push them off the island, off the land there at Pusan. Pusan was the last stand. They was able to get planes and stuff from Tokyo. We were slapped back together, put together with San Diego shakedown, loaded with live ammunition, hit Pearl Harbor, Midway, Yokosuka, Japan, down to Sasebo, each time taking on fuel and fresh supplies. And then with the 58th Task Force, plane guard with the carriers. On September 13th, now, they were talking about an invasion, and nobody agreed that Incheon was a good place. But MacArthur said it was an ideal place. On the 13th of September 1950, 6 destroyers steamed into the harbor, dropped anchor, drew enemy fire, and we held our fire. We were supposed to hold our fire until we was given the command to fire. Well, our skipper, he was up there on top, and each skipper has his own private boat called the gig, and it's very fancy and everything. Well, one of the shore batteries there shot the gig right in the middle. The engine fell out on the deck. That was it. We gave him broadside from then on, burned the paint right off the rifles, which is 5-inch 38s. We took out all the stations that we could. There was one that was giving us a bad time. We found out it was a tank. It was running in 4 quarters. It running in 1 quarter, shoot, running in 1 quarter. Finally, they tried going across and they took it out. Tide was going back out, so we went back out to sea, out to the supply ship, loaded up more ammunition, went back in the 14th for the same thing. Not as much hostile action, not as many mines. Back out to sea that evening. Next morning, 15th of September 1950, was the invasion of Incheon. The Marines at 8 a.m. took Wowido. It would look like a briquette. It had been burned by so much with napalm. But they had caves in there, so they still had a little bit of action there. And at 5 p.m. that evening, the Army went and invaded Incheon and started to push towards Seoul. It was one of the biggest fireworks I ever seen. We had about 6 carriers out to sea, Task Force 58, bringing planes in. There was 4 battleships out behind us, firing missiles over. And on the battleship, there was projectiles weigh about 1 ton. And you could see them flying through the air. Then in front of them was a cruiser firing. Then us destroyers were firing. And then on the beach they had LSTs converted to rocket ships. They fired. It was one of them. And napalm bombs all over the place. It was the biggest firework. It was successful. It was a successful invasion. And today, there's a statue 12 foot high of General Douglas MacArthur in Incheon. Now they was a God-fearing nation, so when they were liberated during World War II, there's a member that I know from Porterville here, David Chamberlain, built the first Christian church in South Korea. We went back out to sea, joined the Task Force 58, and our engines were not too good. They would run at full speed. You'd run into the wind, launch the planes, then you turn around, run back down the wind, and then turn around into windward to receive the planes. Pretty near burned all of our engines up and everything. So we did lose 1 engine, but in the meantime, our supply ships were out, and we were supplied by an Australian supply ship. That was a disaster. I don't know whether you ever eaten mutton or not, but mutton is mutton. Today I still can't eat sheep. And we got, instead of coffee, we got tea. And they gave us Bull Durham for tobacco. Now where they got the Bull Durham, I don't know. But it was so dry, it was like a fuse. You light it up and it's gone. But that was one of the experiences. We also had, in World War II, they had buglers. Well, afterwards they made quartermasters out of them, which they worked up on the bridge with the captain, the steering and so forth. And we had one, so the captain said, well, you'll blow your bugle. So he blew his bugle. The first time he did that for Riverley, we thought the Chinese communists was attacking us. Everybody jumped out of their boats. But it was an experience. The day after the 16th of September, the day after I was assigned to the U.S. Army, and their landing crafts, and we was hauling supplies into the beach. Well, on our first trip, it was sort of rocky and so forth in there. We put the stuff on there, and as Herb will tell you pretty soon, good canned food. But we were attacked by civilians, and actually they weren't, but at the time we thought that civilians. One of them had jumped on top of me, knocked my rifle down, which was on a sling. He had a machete. Well, I'm here. He's not. And the other guys, I heard gunfire and everything, and the sergeant says, let's get out of here. So we went back out. They gave us another place to go in, and we were unloading supplies there. And I asked Sergeant, how come that dirt's kicking up over there? He says, we're under fire, take cover. So we went back out. So I know what those Army guys did because I got 1 day of experience in it. And I was glad to be in the Navy because I had 3 hot meals, a roof over my head, and a nice warm bunk at night. Now we'll turn it over to Bob Hanson, who was in Busan, right?
Well, I joined the service when I was 16. I already knew everything I needed to know, so I quit Porterville High School and I joined the Army. Well, when I finished my basic training, I was home in June, and the Korean conflict broke out, and I thought it would be over before I had to go back to camp. Well, like a lot of other people, I was fooled. But, from there, I went to Aberdeen, Maryland, to machinist school. Spent 3 months there. Came home and shipped over to Korea. I got over there at Christmas time. And between Christmas and New Year's, I don't think I got 1 hour in the bunk. We was cleaning rifles. We took rifles with us. When we got over there, we turned in all of our clothing, all of our rifles, and they give us new ones. And they was completely packed with cosmoline, which is a heavy grease. And the only way you can get it out of there was with hot water. And you take a shipload of GIs using a little bit of hot water. doesn't go very far. But anyway, after we got them cleaned, we went out on the firing range, laid in the snow, zeroed them in, got back on the ship in Tokyo, or Yokohama, and we went to Incheon. And my boarding number is 1421, which may not mean much to you, but it did to me at that time. And I had everything on I could get on. I was freezing, but still sweating. And when they got up to 1,400 people getting off the ship, they said, the tide's going out, we're getting out of here. I said, oh boy. Because I could hear the boom booms over there, and that's barely 17, I was scared. But we went down to Incheon. I mean, to Busan, we unloaded, and they put me in a great big building about twice the size of this, and had a little bitty wood stove or a coal stove right in the middle. Well, I was number 21, so I got right next to that fire, man. I thought, that's it. Well, everybody in that place tried to sit on my bunk that night to stay warm. The next night, I was at the far corner. I didn't care. But they called me the crazy GI there, because the first night on duty, I was working swing shift. I was in a roundhouse is what it was. We rebuilt the steam engines. And the engine came in off the test run, and it had a steam leak up there, and this guy's hacking on with a little hammer. And he crawled down, and he said, started to crawl down, he says, something in Korean, I don't know what he said, but I pointed my rifle at him, and I told him to tighten that thing up. He shook his head, and I pointed it right at him. I said, you will tighten that thing up. So, guy next to me, he said, you crazy GI. The man tightened it, got down off there, and then the guy says, you know, he's inspector, he don't have to work. Well, I knew nothing about inspectors. All I knew was I was there, and we were trying to get that steam engine back out on the line. As a hero, I don't think I was. We had the generals trained there after he got killed in a Jeep accident, and I was a guard on it. Well, there come some rounds come in there, and you know how thick them wheels are on those things? That's where I was at, right underneath and behind them. Only 4 or 5 rounds come in, but when it was over with, I was still scared. We found General Pershing's steam engine there, and it was quite ornate. And it was a standard gauge railroad. Between Korea and where they left it in Paris, I think it was narrow gauge. The only way they could get it down there was aboard ship, but nobody would say they did. But it was in their junkyard. We rebuilt that thing, put brass on it and polished it all up, and we used it. And I was in Newark, California, when they brought that thing home, and it went across the bridge right by my shop. And I heard that. I didn't know it was coming. I said, hey, that's a steam engine out there. You know, and I run out to see it go by. I did one thing over there that scared me. I just knew I was going to get court-martialed over. We had to pick these engines up to take off the wheels to work on them. And we picked it up and went to move it. The front of the engine was brown. They had a cable over that. And on the back's just a big old bar, because it just slid up under there, and we lifted it up. Well, the cables went this way and that way. I had the bar in. And it came off that bar, and it bent the engine this way a little bit, the frame. So we called it the mountain climbing engine. But I just knew they was going to nail me, but they didn't. Thank God. I was almost ready to come home. But I didn't have the experiences Jim did. I was lucky. When I came home, they sent me out to Barstow to Camp Irwin. They call it Fort Irwin now. And they gave me a choice. I had 3 months to go. Says, you can re-enlist and stay here, or go to Korea, or maybe Germany. I said, is there another option? He says, yeah. And I said, that's the one I want. I want out. I got out, and I came back to Porterville, and I went to college here, junior college at that time, and I got my diploma. I was just happy to have it. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Herb Bonds, and I was introduced to Korea by a little letter I received from the Department of Defense. It's read something like this: greetings. Your friends and neighbors have selected you to represent them in the armed forces of the United States. In other words, I was drafted. This was in early 1952, February 1952. I just completed my at midterm at San Jose State. I graduated midterm. It didn't take them 2 weeks to draft me into the service. I reported to Fort Ord for basic training, and I found that they do things in a democratic manner in basic training. After we completed after our weeks of training, they said, you can decide whether you want to go. You have 3 choices, and we'll select one of them. But he said one of them has to be FECOM. It's F-E-C-O-M. It's a short for Far East Command. That means Korea. He said one of those choices has to be FECOM. The others could be anything you want. So I put down number 1 choice was Caribbean Command. I thought it'd be good to go to Panama or Guantanamo or somewhere like that and put my tour of duty there. And the second choice was EUCOM, European Command. I thought it'd be good to go to China, to Germany or France or Belgium, somewhere in that area. And I put FECOM, of course, as my 3rd choice. And all the rest of the company did the same thing. They put FECOM 3rd. Well, guess what? 150 of us got FECOM. We all went to Korea. I showed up over there, and my first introduction to Korea was my first night in a replacement depot at Weijambu. And we were bed check Charlie. It sounded like a washing machine or something flying over us, and someone said, oh, that's bed check Charlie. And what he'd do, he'd fly over at night and drop grenades out of the plane and just to shake us up or something. But it sure shook me up, it really did. It just scared the hell out of me. I didn't know what to do with hand grenades going off, and you couldn't even see the plane or anything. So I was introduced to bed check Charlie, my first night in Korea. Then I was assigned to Fox Company of the 35th Infantry Regimental Combat Team attached to the 25th Division. And those of you that know the nomenclature of the Army, the Fox Company is a rifle company. So that's what I was in Korea, a rifleman. And I spent my entire time in the Fox Company as a rifleman. I went over there as a private E1 or E2 rather, and I came out as a sergeant first class. So I did go up through the ranks pretty fast. Of course, there's a lot of guys shot out, which helped a great deal in accruing the rank that I had. As a matter of fact, I went on R&R to Japan as a corporal and came back and found I was a sergeant because we had a big firefight when I was gone in Florida that week. We had 2 or 3 guys shot out of my platoon, and I became a sergeant, a platoon sergeant, after I got home from R&R, and I was just a corporal. But they made me a sergeant, and that was it. Now, the Korean War, as was stated earlier, the first phase of it, the North Koreans pushed the South Koreans and the American forces all the way down to Busan, just a little bitty perimeter. And then at that point, the commanding general there said, this is no Dunkirk. There are no ships out there to get you off. You stand and fight or die. And boy, that really runs a chill up your spine when they tell you stand and fight or die, one or the other. And we fought. We stood there and we fought them. And we pushed them back. And at the same time, General MacArthur went around, invaded Incheon, and almost split the enemy forces in 2. Well, they quickly withdrew from Busan all the way back up north to escape being trapped in between the 2 forces. And that was the second phase. The third phase was the Chinese came in. When we pushed them to Yalu, the Chinese came in and pushed us all the way back down again, past the 38th parallel. They retook Seoul and Daegu and all in the midsection, and we pushed them back to where was the 38th parallel. They dug a line, called it their MLR. We dug a line, called it our MLR, main line of resistance. And in between the 2 was a space of about 2 or 3 miles between the 2 lines. And in this space between the 2 and 3 miles was little hills, about the similar size as Republican Hill here north of Porterville with all those antennae on them. And one of them that I was faced with was called Old Baldy. It was right in front of us. It's called Old Baldy because all the vegetation had been knocked off. Now these hills were important because they were in front of our MLR, and they had small hills in front of their MLR. We couldn't have the enemy forces occupying those hills. They could see what we're doing and hear what we're doing. They could find our weak spot, and they could probably attack us on our weak spot and crash our line, crash through our line somehow. So we had to occupy those little hills. And that's why we started running little 4- and 7-man patrols out there to occupy the hilltops. And it became known as the Hilltop Wars. You probably read in newspapers, some of you, if you read or if you read in history about them, some of them had distinct names. One was Pork Chop Hill. The reason they call it pork chop, the top of it looks like a pork chop. It has a ravine down one side, it looks like a pork chop. And then there was one called the Hook, just north of there. The one in front of my outfit was called Old Baldy. And then there was one down near Panmunjom. My second time on tour of duty was COP 2, Combat Outpost 2. That was near Panmunjom. The significance of COP 2 was it was next door to Panmunjom, and every time the Chinese wanted to make some deal with the Americans, they wanted to show force, they attacked COP 2. I don't know why, but they attacked COP 2 and tried to run us off it. And that was a tough go that second time up there in the front. But we run these little 4-man patrols out to occupy these hilltops during the day and night. They were occupied day and night. And that's what our food would run through. We'd take our canned goods with us. And those of you out here, you've probably seen P-38s, not the airplane, but those little can openers, you know, you twist little can openers, you have it along the side. Everyone had a P-38. We'd take a metal, our top hat, and we'd put it over a fire, get in, pour it full of water, get real boiling hot water, and put these cans in them and heat them, and then we'd open them up, and to our surprise, we'd have greasy pork or steamed chicken or whatever it was. It wasn't very good, but at least it was edible. And we'd eat that. And on the bottom was another special little container. You'd break it off, open it up, and there was usually a cookie in there. We call it a hardtack. A cookie. It was supposed to be a cookie, but it was more hard than it was a cookie. And then there would be 3 cigarettes in there. They were really, had been in there a long time. I think this food was put together about 1948 or 45, somewhere then. And we were opening it up after 4 or 5 years later to eat. And the cigarettes, you could crack them open. I was a smoker at that time. And you could take it and you could crack the cigarette, it would pop in half, just crack it in half. That's how stale they were. Well, at least we could smoke 3 free cigarettes per day. It was all we got. But perhaps the most important thing that happened to me was that I was selected as Marilyn Monroe's escort. She came over there to put on a show for the troops, and they asked, they decided, well, we're going to have to get another 2 versions of how I was selected. I'm going to tell you both versions, and you select the one you think is true. The Army's version is she came in by helicopter, got out of the helicopter, and the colonel said, well, Marilyn, I'm going to get you an escort, but we don't want to put an officer in there. It look too elitist, so we'll get an EM, enlisted man, to go in the Jeep with you. So he came to me because he had been the captain when I first got to Korea, captain of our company, and he said, Bond said, you're going to be her escort, and that's the Army version of it. Now, my version of it is the real version, and here's the way it went. When she landed the helicopter, she got out, and the colonel said, who would you like to have as your escort? She said, line up all the men. They lined up all the men, and she asked one question. She said, who's the best and the biggest lover of the whole bunch? And they all pointed to me, right down there. Now, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That's why I was selected. So I see you agree with me. It really happened. But anyway, I was her escort for a time, period of time. I enjoyed my stay in Korea. That some of the things I remember most about Korea, it was cold. Up in the northern part of Korea, it's really cold. It's the best way I can describe it is, and you probably know what I mean, brass monkey cold. It was really cold. And you'd be laying out there on patrol sometimes, you can't move, and your joints and your arms and legs would stiffen up, and you can't do a thing. It's just unbearably cold. It was way below 0. You can't lick your lips. If you lick your lips, they'd crack. They'd freeze and crack open. So you try to keep your lips as dry as you can. You wouldn't dare. Or don't even blow your breath through your lips to get them wet. You get the moisture and think it'll break. You try to blow through your nose, but then you'd find that your nose was freezing down below that too. So it was a tough situation. Korea was several of the people I talked to in Korea, some of the guys I talked to, we wondered, what were we doing there? We didn't know really what. We were there fighting communists. That's all we knew. Communists were trying to take it over and we're trying to stop them. My purpose of being there, I wanted to get home. I wanted to be home, and I didn't want to fight. I wasn't no fighter. I was a lover. I wasn't a fighter. I don't know why they had me there. I was perhaps the worst soldier they had over there at the time. And being scared, yes, I was scared to death. Whenever they put me on one of those little patrols out there, you better believe that I could hide behind my goose pimples. I was so afraid. I really was. But at the moment of truth, and some of you know, you've probably heard that word, of the moment of truth. You'll pull that weapon and you'll fire that round. That's the guy that we want in the outfit with us, is the guy who will fire that round at the moment of truth. You don't want to hesitate. If a guy hesitates, he's going to die. And I've seen guys die because they would hesitate on pulling that trigger. No, you pull it and you let them know that you mean business and you're going to kill them. They're there for one purpose. They're going to kill you, so your objective is to kill them. And don't think about it, just kill him. And if you happen to hit one and blow his head off, so much the better. You don't have to see him anymore. That's it. So you learn to accept it. I'd written letters home to my girlfriend at the time over there. I'd write home. I told her, I said, find somebody else. I said, I don't think I'm going to make it out of here because I've seen too many guys die. Too many guys got hit, everything else. I saw it, and it bothered me, and I just knew my time was going to come. You start looking around. This guy got hit, he got hit, he got hit. My time's coming. Where am I going to get hit? You wonder about it a lot. But when I got off the boat in San Francisco, when I finally came home, no one was there to greet me. There was no bands playing or no fanfare or anything else. Somebody told me, said, Sergeant, put your duffel bag on that bus. You're going to Camp Stoneman, and that was it. I got out of Camp Stoneman, I mustered out, and this little Okie kid had never had $500 in his life. That's what they gave me, $500 when I mustered out of Camp Stoneman. I was a wealthy guy at that time. So that was my stay in the Army. The Army did me well. I felt good about the Army. I'll tell you why. It taught me two things. One, to obey orders, and that's what they do in basic training. You see these guys marching along in a column and so forth, or in a block, marching along. You think, isn't that pretty? But that's one thing. They're doing things as a group, and that's what the Army will teach you to do, is do something as a group. It's a group effort, and that's so important in a battle, is it's a group effort. There are no Audie Murphys over there. You have to do it by the group. A group of you have to take that hill, or a group of you have to do this job, or whatever it is, the task that you have to do. So I really think it's important. I would like to see our youth go through the same rigmarole and develop those two things. How to take orders and how to work together in a group. I think it's so important.
Well, I never killed anybody, so I guess I'm not a hero. I joined I'm Bill Warner, by the way. I joined the Marine Corps June 6, 1950, 3 weeks before the conflict in Korea broke out. It was not a war. We called it a police action. The Chinese called it the anti-American war. The Koreans called it the Liberate the Fatherland War. It was never really called a war because, if you called it that, then Congress would have to declare war and nobody knew what would happen. I didn't know what was going on. Ignorance was my middle name, probably still is. 17 years old, Parris Island, South Carolina. About the closest thing to hell I can imagine on the face of the earth. I mean, I've done a lot of prison visitation out at Corcoran, this, that, and the other, and I've heard how bad things out there. Well, you don't have to go to Corcoran to get initiated into what goes on in this world. One thing I do remember was the first time I went to the South. I'd never been to the South before, a little northern Ohio kid. And I got down there, and the first thing I found out was in the railroad stations, they had separate facilities for blacks and separate facilities for whites, and separate lunch counters and bathrooms and drinking fountains. I said, hey, this is what I'm going to be fighting for, to keep our way of life here. And I thought, now something ain't right here. I got down to Parris Island, and their first job to do is dehumanize you and brutalize you as much as possible. I know our drill instructor is a World War II veteran there. There's a big place in the wall opposite his door where he smashed some recruit's head into it. He wound up throwing one guy out the window, a second-story window. It attacked him with a bayonet. We had guys crack in there. It was not an easy thing to do. 14 weeks of hell. We had guys try to escape. We had guys try to fake being homosexual to get out. We had just all kinds of interesting things. I grew up fast. I got beat up one night by a bunch of cowards, threw a blanket over me, started beating on me. Why? Because I tried to save some guy. They were brutalizing in the shower, ripping his skin off with a kayak brush. They didn't think he was clean enough, and I tried to save him. And so I got beat up for my trouble. So that's when I got introduced to the Marine Corps way of doing things. I did learn some things in there. One, I learned that Marines are better than anybody else on the face of the earth. You're better than civilians, you're better than women, you're better than Army, you're better than Navy. I guess the 101st Airborne is about the closest thing we had to recognize that somebody else was good as a Marine. And boy, when it came to people that lived overseas, you were definitely better than them. Because if you thought of them as, people equal to you, you couldn't kill them. If you got to make them sort of an Untermenschen like Hitler. You got to dehumanize them, make them subhuman. That's okay to kill them; doesn't bother you too much. But I very quickly learned that all Orientals were gooks. Now, gook is part of the name of Korea, the real name of Korea, something something min gook. And so they all became gooks, and even the ones that were on our side, in the South, were gooks. And not as good as us. And well, of course, we still keep that mentality, I think, sometimes. So anyway, I learned that. We're superior to everybody else in the world. Now, I learned some other stuff. When I made staff sergeant, I found a very interesting thing. They put me in a room, 4 sergeants to a room, and the 2 of them were black. Well, I'd never been around black people in my life, and I was a little afraid of them. Figured that they were, just keep separate there. And I found these were a couple of the greatest guys I'd ever met. I met their families, rode up to LA with them from Camp Pendleton, and we just got along great. And I found out, gee, while I'm learning that these people in Asia are subhuman, I'm finally finding some people that we think are subhuman here are human. And it takes a lot of doing, to change your mind around things like that. I didn't ever make it to Korea. I don't know if I'm sorry about that or not. I volunteered a couple of times. I volunteered for, I was down at Camp Pendleton, the 7th Engineers Fleet Marine Force. And anyway, I volunteered for Chesty Puller's 3rd Brigade. He was really a bad general over there. Everybody respected Chesty Puller. He was as tough as they come. And I wanted to be in his outfit, which was going to go over and win the war. Well, 3rd Brigade sat around. They became the 3rd Marine Division. And finally I figured, now enough of this. I want to go over there and kill me some gooks. So I went in and told them, look, I want to be in a replacement draft. So they put me in a replacement draft to go to Korea. And while I was there, guess what? The armistice at Panmunjom was signed. Okay, so here I am. Well, what happens now? So they threw me back into my old outfit, and the whole outfit went to Japan, just in case the communists started something again, So I wound up spending the rest of my enlistment in Japan, which was kind of interesting. One of the highlights of my trip to Japan was we spent 2 weeks on a beautiful tropical paradise island called Iwo Jima. And not all, but a lot of the bunkers were still intact. They had great fields of fire covering the beaches. It was just, I can't imagine what it was like for the Marines that landed there in 1945 and suffered 85% casualties. And I really got a sense of history. It really made me feel like, hey, something really happened here. And anyway, I could go on and on and on. When I got out of the service, of course, the war was over, and I started to learn a little bit about what was going on, because I was totally ignorant during it. They didn't tell you what a communist was. They didn't tell you the history of Korea. They didn't tell you anything about the Cold War particularly, except the Russians are bad and the Chinese are bad. But it's all a big stream. When I became a history major at UCLA, I found out that all this is a part of a big, long line of things that have happened. World War I caused World War II, caused the Cold War, caused, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, capitalism versus sharing everything, communism. And I began to get a different perspective on things. I would recommend to anybody that's interested reading a book called This Kind of War by T.R. Fehrenbach. And you can learn more by reading that book than you can by listening to us guys that only saw a small portion of what was going on. You get the big picture, and you find out that they didn't really like us much in the south of Korea. It was a war to prevent them from uniting, because if they united, Russia and China were their neighbors, and it would have become a communist country. We didn't want that. We wanted to be a player. There was one interest. We sent a guy over there to administer Korea after the Japanese were run out. His name was Hodge. And one of the first things he did was to restore the Japanese colonial administrators and the collaborators to their positions of power that they had under the Japanese occupation. Well, you can imagine that went over about like a Led Zeppelin across the Atlantic with the Koreans. There were riots, there were strikes, guerrilla warfare. These are the people that were fighting on their side, right? It was not a war between the North Koreans and the South Koreans. It was a war between communism and a capitalist system that was afraid that if Korea fell, there would be a domino theory, next, this country would go, next that country would go, fall over like dominoes. So it was a proxy war between the United States and its allies. We didn't have very many allies. The United Nations sent some troops over, but it was basically a proxy war, okay? And the Koreans were the ones that suffered. Tens of thousands of Koreans died in that war, and they weren't political on either side. They were just caught in the middle. It was kind of unfortunate, but the war's not over. My son did two tours of duty in Korea, and they were at the 38th parallel then, and they're at the 38th parallel now, demilitarized zone, and we still got guns pointed at each other, and it's not over. And the Cold War between Russia and the United States, well, maybe it's over. I don't know. I do know one thing, that it cost the United States trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Well, trillions and trillions. Anyway, because we're scared of the Russians. So we build missiles, and then they have to build more missiles, and we build more missiles, and pretty soon they're broke and we're broke. And we're beginning to feel what happens when you spend all your money on wars. Anyway, like I say, one last thing, I've got to tell you this, because, Marines feel superior to everybody. And I was in southern Honshu, and we used to get the Armed Forces radio, and they're always talking about the Nagoya Comets and the Tokyo Bulldogs, the great football teams over there. God, yeah, man, Army, versus Army. And that's always, every day, these two great football teams and how they're doing. Well, it came down to the fact that the Tokyo Bulldogs won the Northern Championship. Why not? Anyway, they met in the New Year's game in Kyoto, the Camp Fisher Marines. Now, what the Marines did was they went all over the whole theater of operations and pulled out every professional football player they could find. And finally, when I left the game on New Year's, the score was 55-0 in favor of the Camp Fisher Marines. Anyway.
I'm Dan Hetherington. My first experience in Korea was 1947 and 48. I was with a troop carrier squadron. We hauled troops and freight, and once in a while I'd get a trip to, we had several trips throughout the squadron, but they changed airplanes. The same crew didn't get all the trips. But the first thing when you touched down, they would come, the GIs there would come and ask you, did you bring the mail? And the second thing was, did you bring the Stars and Stripes? The Stars and Stripes is a little military paper that is published overseas for GIs overseas, wherever it's possible to get it to them. And so we'd unload the freight, and I'd go to the chow hall and get a GI can full of water. They only could get, excuse me, they had a 30-gallon tank or a bucket that they set in the chow hall, and that's the only water they could have if that thing went empty before the troops were done for the day, well, you went without water till tomorrow. You got 30 more gallons tomorrow. And you could walk into barracks and see the beds were probably 3-4 foot high with anything they could find to put on their bed to keep from freezing to death. It was ultra cold. I used to take my little bucket of water to the airplane. I'd sleep in the airplane and have something to brush my teeth with. I'd try to keep it from freezing so I could brush my teeth in the morning. And, we'd load up, we took patients back to Japan, so we'd load up the next morning and head back to Tachikawa, Japan. My Navy experience started, well, I got out of the Air Force and I decided, well, I'm going home. I did go home. Then when the Korean deal started, I thought, like the rest of these gentlemen, I thought, well, I got to go help. So I went back in the Navy, and I got assigned to Air Anti-Submarine Squadron. That what their job is to go out and hunt and identify enemy submarines. You go out, you fly. Most of your flights are at night. You have we had a 50 million candle power searchlight on the airplane, plus radar, and we could drop sonobuoys and pinpoint them. But at nights, when the Russian subs come to the surface, because you can't see them, they'll lay on the lee side of a fishing trawler or get where they don't think you're going to be, and they'll come up and charge their batteries. I have a memory of a Russian sailor shaking his fist at me because I hit him with that 50,000 searchlight, and he was, we'd had an awful fight going if he could have caught me, but we kept going. So, but one thing I wanted to mention that we were laying in Yokosuka getting ready to go out on another cruise, and somebody aboard the ship thought it was a big deal, a big funny deal, that he started a rumor that the Russians had sunk one of our submarines, and that thing went through the ship like a forest fire. And naturally, the ship's captain got a hold of it, and so he, when the horn rings and the voice says, "This is your captain speaking," everybody stops and listens. He said, "Whoever you are, don't ever let me catch you, but I know that's a false rumor, and make sure that I never find you, because you'll never get out of the brig if I do." So he squelched that right away, but he had a lot of panicky people. I was working with a first-class aviation machinist mate that had went down on the Yorktown, and he said, I went down on a good ship, I'm not going down on this one. And he begged me to do everything but stay on that ship. I said, no, I can't go with you. So, but after we found out, well, everything was fine. So, but we had a lot of experiences over there, and it was fun, and we helped, I guess. One thing I would like to tell you is that I'm with the American Legion, and our national commander makes a kind of a world tour when they come in, and they go to the 38th parallel, and I've never heard one yet that didn't tell me that those Korean people still stand there with a godful hating stare at you. They won't speak, they won't do anything. There's a enclosed area you can go, but they're on one side and you're on another, looking through windows. But they said it'll just scare you to death to even look at them. I'm sure they have the same feeling about us. So I think that's the extent of my program.